They built a fence across his driveway, cutting off access to his own home, claiming it was for the community's benefit. Jack Wilson, a veteran who had spent his life defending others' rights, was told his documents meant nothing, and that his driveway now belonged to the HOA. Karen Greenfield, the HOA president, smugly declared, "You can complain all you want, but nothing will change." Little did she know, her arrogance would be her downfall. All Jack needed was the evidence that would turn the entire situation upside down. But let's start from the beginning. Jack Wilson, a retired Air Force veteran and widower, had spent his life serving others. Now, all he wanted was a quiet corner to call his own, a place where the gentle hum of nature, and the laughter of neighborhood children, could replace the roar of jet engines, and the weight of responsibility. That dream had finally come true when he moved into a charming suburban home, nestled in a peaceful cul-de-sac. The property was everything he had envisioned: a wide driveway, perfect for his reliable truck, a cozy garden where he could sit and read, and a neighborhood that promised tranquility. For the first time in years, Jack felt he could exhale. But one crisp morning, as the sun cast golden light over his front lawn, Jack stepped outside and froze. His driveway, his private stretch of pavement leading to his garage, was now blocked by a shiny new fence. The structure was jarring, both in its appearance and its placement. It ran straight across the driveway, effectively trapping Jack's vehicle behind it. Attached to the fence was a bold red sign that read, "HOA property. Do not remove without authorization." Jack stared at the barrier, confusion giving way to anger. His first thought was that there must have been some mistake. Who would think it was okay to block his driveway? The idea was absurd. Taking a deep breath, he walked around the fence to his truck, where he tried to back it out, but of course, it was no use. The fence was solidly constructed. His frustration bubbled over. "What on earth is this nonsense?" he muttered to himself. Determined to get answers, Jack made his way to the office of the Homeowners Association, the HOA, a governing body he had always considered a minor inconvenience, at worst. He was greeted by Karen Greenfield, the HOA president. Karen was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman, with a reputation for running the neighborhood with an iron fist. Residents often whispered about her authoritarian style, but few dared to challenge her. Jack wasted no time. "Karen," he began, holding his composure. "There's a fence across my driveway. It's blocking my car. Can you explain why it's there?" Karen looked up from her desk, her expression a mix of feigned surprise and unapologetic authority. "Ah, Mr. Wilson," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "Yes, that fence, it's part of the HOA's initiative to enhance the community's appearance and security. We've decided it was necessary to delineate certain areas more clearly." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Enhance the community by cutting off access to my property?" Karen shrugged. "Your driveway is technically part of the HOA's easement. We have the right to make improvements as we see fit." Jack felt his patience wearing thin. Improvements? Blocking someone's access to their home isn't an improvement. It's an overreach. "You didn't even notify me about this." Karen leaned back in her chair, her smile thin and condescending. "We don't need individual approval for every decision we make, Mr. Wilson. The community as a whole benefits from these changes. I suggest you see it as a positive development." Jack's jaw tightened. The arrogance of her response was infuriating. He had spent decades serving his country, fighting for the rights and freedoms of others. And now, he was being told he couldn't access his own property because of a decision he had no say in? Standing his ground, Jack replied firmly. "I don't see this as positive. I see it as a violation of my rights as a homeowner. That driveway is mine, Karen. And I won't stand for this." Karen's smile faltered, but only slightly. "Then I suggest you file a formal complaint, Mr. Wilson." "But I wouldn't hold your breath. The board supports this decision, and we believe it's in the best interest of the community." As Jack walked away, frustration and disbelief coursed through him. He knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The fence wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a challenge, one he wasn't about to back down from. Jack knew that if he wanted to fight this battle, he needed facts. Cold, hard evidence that no one, not even Karen Greenfield, could dismiss. He spent hours sifting through old property documents, blueprints, and legal papers. His desk became a battlefield piled high with yellowed pages and highlighted notes. There it was, in black and white. His driveway, the same one now blocked by the HOA's fence, had never been included in their jurisdiction. Jack's heart lifted slightly. This wasn't just a feeling of injustice, he had proof. With a folder of carefully organized documents tucked under his arm, Jack walked into the HOA meeting held in a small, overly polished community center. The room was sterile, filled with folding chairs and a faint scent of disinfectant, but it was packed. Jack's neighbors sat in quiet clusters, some nodding politely as he entered, others avoiding eye contact. Karen sat at the front of the room, presiding over the meeting like a self-appointed monarch. Her clipboard and sharp gaze made it clear she was ready for any challenge. Jack didn't wait for an invitation. He stood and addressed the room, his voice steady, but laced with frustration. I have here clear evidence that my driveway is private property, not part of the HOA's jurisdiction. This fence is not only unnecessary, but it's also illegal. Karen didn't even glance at the papers Jack held up. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, a small, dismissive smile curling at her lips. Ah, Mr. Wilson, she began, her tone as smooth as it was condescending. Your documents are outdated. The HOA recently updated our guidelines to include your driveway as part of community property. This decision was made in the best interest of the neighborhood. The room buzzed with whispers. Jack felt the heat rise in his chest. Updated guidelines? He asked, his voice rising. You mean you decided to take what isn't yours and call it legal? That's not how property ownership works. Karen's smile widened, but it held no warmth. The board voted, Mr. Wilson. These changes were approved. Your personal feelings on the matter are irrelevant. The audacity of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Jack scanned the room, hoping to find support among his neighbors, but most of them avoided his gaze, their heads bowed or their eyes darting nervously. It was clear why. Karen's reputation as a manipulative and vindictive leader wasn't just talk. Rumors of fines, sudden property inspections, and public shaming for minor infractions had created an atmosphere of fear. No one wanted to be her next target. Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This isn't just about my driveway, he said, addressing the room. It's about fairness. If they can do this to me, what's stopping them from doing it to you? We all have rights, and we need to stand up for them. A few heads nodded subtly, but no one spoke. The silence was deafening. Karen, sensing her control over the room, leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Mr. Wilson, if you're unhappy, you're welcome to file a complaint. But I assure you, the board's decision will stand. Jack clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had served his country. Faced unimaginable challenges. Fought for justice on a global scale. He wasn't about to let a power-hungry HOA president trample on his rights. But it was clear he wouldn't find allies here. Not yet. He would have to look elsewhere for the support he needed. As the meeting adjourned and neighbors shuffled out, Jack stood alone for a moment, his folder of evidence feeling heavier than ever. He had hoped for a resolution. Or at least a sign that others were willing to fight alongside him. Instead, he saw fear, complacency, and a community too beaten down to resist. But Jack wasn't beaten. Not yet. If Karen thought she could intimidate him into submission, she was sorely mistaken. As he walked out into the cool evening air, his resolve hardened. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about standing up to bullies. About showing his neighbors and himself that no one was above the law. Jack realized that his fight with the HOA was far from over. If Karen and her board were going to play dirty, he needed someone who could navigate the legal maze they had constructed. That's when he decided to hire a lawyer. Enter Sarah Hayes, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in property disputes. Her reputation as someone who could unravel the most tangled webs of HOA bureaucracy gave Jack a sense of hope he hadn't felt in weeks. Their first meeting took place in Sarah's modest, but meticulously organized office. The faint scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air as Jack spread out his documents on her desk. "Here's everything I've gathered," he began, his voice tinged with both determination and exhaustion. "I know they're overstepping. But I need to prove it." Sarah adjusted her glasses, scanning the papers with a critical eye. "Jack, from what I'm seeing here, you might have a strong case. But we'll need more than this to take them on. Let's start digging." Over the next few days, Jack and Sarah worked tirelessly. Sarah filed official requests for HOA financial records, permits, and meeting minutes. As the information trickled in, it became clear that something was amiss. First, they discovered that the funds used to construct the fence had been allocated for road repairs. The HOA had essentially robbed the community of necessary maintenance to build a barrier that no one had requested. Jack shook his head in disbelief as Sarah showed him the financial records. "They're stealing from the whole neighborhood," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "How do they get away with this?" Sarah gave him a reassuring look. "They've gotten away with it because no one's challenged them. Until now." The second discovery was even more damning. The HOA had never secured the proper permits to build the fence in the first place. Sarah tapped her pen against the edge of the file. "This means the entire structure is unauthorized. Technically, it shouldn't even be there." Jack felt a spark of hope ignite. "So we can force them to take it down?" Sarah nodded. "That's the plan. But there's more." As they continued their investigation, Sarah uncovered something that made both of them pause. Among the documents was a form with Jack's signature, supposedly giving the HOA permission to install the fence. The problem? Jack had never seen it before. His stomach sank as Sarah held up the paper. "This is a forgery," she said, her voice firm. "Look at the signature, it doesn't match yours. And the date is from a time you weren't even in town." Jack's hands clenched into fists. "Karen forged my signature. That's not just unethical. It's illegal." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "Jack, this changes everything. Forgery is a criminal offense. Not only does this strengthen your case, but it could lead to serious consequences for Karen and the HOA." The weight of the revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Jack thought of all the times he had tried to reason with Karen only to be met with arrogance and disdain. Now he had proof that her actions weren't just overreach. They were outright fraud. For the first time, he felt like the tide might finally be turning in his favor. As Jack left Sarah's office that evening, the cool night air felt invigorating. He knew the fight was far from over, but he wasn't alone anymore. With Sarah's expertise, and the mountain of evidence they had uncovered, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Karen had underestimated him, assuming he would back down, like so many others. But she was about to learn a hard lesson. Jack Wilson didn't give up. Not when it came to defending what was rightfully his. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the quiet suburban streets where this battle had begun. Its high ceilings and rows of wooden benches lent the space an air of solemnity, as if the room itself demanded truth and justice. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his back straight, his hands clasped together to keep them from trembling. Beside him, Sarah Hayes exuded confidence, her organized notes and calm demeanor a steadying presence. Across the room sat Karen Greenfield, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit, flanked by her high-priced attorney. Her posture was that of someone who believed she had already won. The proceedings began with Karen's lawyer painting her as a well-meaning leader, someone who only acted in the best interests of the community. The decisions made by Miss Greenfield and the HOA, he argued, his voice smooth and practiced, were necessary to ensure the neighborhood's safety and cohesion. Karen nodded in agreement, her expression one of feigned concern for her neighbors. Jack felt a flash of frustration. How could someone twist the truth so easily? But he reminded himself to trust Sarah and the mountain of evidence they had gathered. When it was their turn, Sarah stood, her voice steady and firm, as she began to lay out their case. "Your Honor," she started, "the actions taken by the HOA, and more specifically by Miss Greenfield, were not only overreaching, but also blatantly illegal. My client's driveway was never within the HOA's jurisdiction. Despite this, a fence was constructed without proper permits using funds earmarked for road repairs. Funds that were meant to benefit the entire community. Most egregiously, we have evidence that Miss Greenfield forged my client's signature on a document to justify her actions. The courtroom murmured at the word, forged. Jack could feel the tension shift. Karen's attorney quickly objected, but the judge allowed Sarah to proceed. One by one, Sarah presented the evidence, the financial records showing misused funds, the lack of permits for the fence, and finally, the forged document. When the forged signature was projected onto the courtroom screen, juxtaposed with Jack's real signature, the difference was undeniable. Karen's confident facade began to crack. She shifted in her seat, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Her lawyer tried to downplay the forgery, claiming it was a clerical error, but the judge wasn't buying it. Miss Greenfield, the judge said, his tone firm, this court does not take allegations of forgery lightly. The evidence presented here suggests deliberate misconduct, not a simple mistake. Jack watched as Karen's composure faltered. For the first time, she seemed genuinely rattled. He felt a surge of vindication, not just for himself, but for all the neighbors who had been too afraid to stand up to her. After hours of testimony and cross-examination, the judge delivered his verdict. The fence in question was constructed unlawfully, without proper permits, and using funds allocated for other purposes. Furthermore, the evidence of forgery is both compelling and deeply troubling. I hereby order the immediate removal of the fence. Additionally, Miss Greenfield and the HOA will compensate Mr. Wilson for damages, including emotional distress and legal fees. Lastly, I am recommending a full investigation into the HOA's financial practices. The weight of the judge's words hung in the air, followed by a stunned silence. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, a sense that justice had finally been served. He turned to Sarah, who gave him a small, victorious smile. As the courtroom emptied, Karen remained seated, her once confident demeanor replaced with a look of defeat. Jack didn't gloat or revel in her downfall. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about standing up for what was right. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. Jack took a deep breath, the tension in his chest finally easing. This fight had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but it had also reminded him of his own resilience. With the HOA under investigation, and Karen facing the consequences of her actions, Jack knew this was a victory not just for him, but for everyone who believed in fairness and accountability. A few weeks after the court's decision, the fence was finally removed. The loud hum of machinery filled the air as workers dismantled the structure, piece by piece, clearing Jack's driveway at last. Standing on his porch, Jack felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. The driveway, once a symbol of the HOA's overreach, was now fully restored to its rightful owner. Jack didn't stop there. With the help of a local contractor, he repaired the driveway and planted new flowers along its edges, breathing life back into the space. At the entrance, he installed a clear, sturdy sign, "Private Property. No trespassing." It was more than a notice. It was a statement of victory. Karen Greenfield, now disgraced, had stepped down as HOA president. Her resignation came amidst growing backlash from neighbors and ongoing investigations into her actions. Without her domineering presence, the community began to heal. Inspired by Jack's stand, residents organized to demand changes to the HOA's governance, ensuring greater transparency and fairness moving forward. One day, a neighbor stopped by to thank Jack. "You gave us all the courage to speak up," they said. Jack smiled, feeling a quiet pride. It wasn't just about his driveway anymore. It was about showing that even one determined person could challenge injustice and win. As Jack sat on his porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm hues, he reflected on the journey. It had been long and exhausting, but it was worth it. His fight had not only reclaimed his property but also inspired a community to stand together. For Jack, it was proof that resilience and persistence could turn even the toughest battles into meaningful change. But even after the courtroom victory and the dismantling of the fence, The ripples of Jack's actions continued to spread throughout the neighborhood.